Good evening, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to Family Tech Talk Night, virtual edition. My name is Lynette Owens, and I'm the founder and global director of Trend Micro's Internet Safety for Kids and Families program. And tonight's event is actually brought to you both by Trend Micro and PTO Today. While we wait for people to join the session, and there's quite a few of you, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A function for questions that we'll be monitoring and answering either throughout the session or at the end of the session. And there might be times throughout the conversation where I may ask questions or you just want to make comments, and you can use the chat function for that. So again, use the Q&A function for questions and use the chat function for other communications. Okay, again, welcome everybody to Family Tech Talk Night. Again, my name is Lynette Owens, founder and global director of Trend Micro's Internet Safety for Kids and Families program. I've actually been doing this work for 13 years as of this spring. I have a 17 and a 14-year-old that I have raised through some interesting years when it comes to technology, specifically over the last 5 to 7 of those years. And I want to just thank everybody who is joining me this evening. Specifically want to welcome the following schools who are joining us tonight from the Faith Lutheran School Parent Group in Washington, Hague Elementary School Parent Group, California, Simmons Elementary Parent Group, California, and St. Norbert Catholic School in California. Welcome, and go ahead and put in the chat if you want to just tell me where you're from, which one of those schools are actually yours. Go ahead and use the chat for that. I may actually have to enable the chat, but hopefully that actually works. Oh, there we go. Great. Go ahead and use the chat to let me know where you're dialing in from. And if you're just joining us, please use the Q&A function for questions. Post them anytime throughout, and but we will pause throughout for answering those. So a couple of other things, please participate in the polls, and at the end there'll be a survey. Just looking for your feedback. No obligation at all, but if you want to include your email address in the feedback, you might be one of 5 people that we pick to win a prize, which I'll talk about later on. So first poll, so I can get to know you. And thank you for putting messages in the chat, letting me know where you're from. Welcome. How old is your oldest child? So the poll is going to be showing right now. Go ahead and pick, is your oldest 5 or younger, 6 to 10, 11 to 14, or 15 and older? How old is your oldest child? As I said earlier, for those who might be joining late, my eldest is 17 and my youngest is 14. Great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause it here. So it looks like we are pretty close of a tie between 11 and 14, as well as 6 to 10. So congratulations, you're in the most interesting years ever when it comes to technology. And for those of you with 15 or older, you're my heroes. It's a that has its own special kinds of challenges. All right, here is the next question then for you. Just need to get to know you. How are your kids attending school? Is it remote, hybrid, or completely in person? So go ahead and answer that in the poll. Remote, hybrid, or completely in person. How are your kids attending school? And if you have more than one and they're attending, different ones, just pick one of them. Maybe the one that challenges you the most. That could be all of them, but whichever situation has been most challenging for you. How are your kids attending school? Okay, Fantastic. So it looks like we have quite a few people whose children are in person, and then the next biggest group remote completely, and very few hybrid. What's interesting about this, about your answers, is that the majority of schools in the United States are actually attending hybrid. About 60% of all school districts in a hybrid situation, followed by remote. I'm sorry, remote, and then in person is last. So in any case, regardless of how your children are attending, we know this has been a challenging year. And I think, what we're going to talk about tonight is a recognition of not just the challenges that already existed for us as parents trying to raise kids with technology, but also a recognition of the additional new dynamics that took place over this past year. And even though we are now about almost a year into this, I think we're still learning, and there may have been things that you've adopted for your family, or even that you've realized about school if you're doing it remote or hybrid or some other interesting model that's new. Maybe there are some things that were good. Maybe there are some new uses of technology that you discovered, that your children discovered, that you're doing together as a family or with far-flung relatives that you might want to keep when all this is over. So spend some time reflecting on what changed with your relationship with technology over the past year, and what of those changes you might want to keep, and which ones you can't wait to get rid of once everything is over. But these comments here are very common to every family that I've spoken to over the last year. The idea of privacy in the home was diminished. The challenges of competing for the network in the home was maybe something you hadn't experienced before, and the begging for more screen time and the guilt that maybe you were racked with because you did say yes. These were all very common experiences among all of us. But if you made the choice at times to keep your children and your family home, your community safe, and them safe, and traded that off for maybe a little more screen time, that is okay. We really had no blueprint to follow for what we just experienced, this collective traumatic experience together. And I think for you being here tonight says a lot about the fact that you'll be okay, and so will your kids. So hopefully you'll get some information tonight and things to think about and things to share with them that will help you go through the rest of this period, this challenging period, and even beyond. And while a lot of things changed over the past year, there's a lot of things that didn't as well. The fact that our children still need our guidance when it comes to technology did not change, and nor did the risks. The risks of seeing content that might not be appropriate for their age. Maybe being contacted by people that you'd rather they weren't contacted by. The benefits also did not change, and if anything, we may have learned new things and new ways in which the internet could benefit our children and us. But that is why always, and especially now, teaching our kids how to be good digital citizens is paramount. And, I'd love for you, again, to share in the chat or in your questions. Again, use the Q&A at any time. The things that challenged you, things that you maybe liked, things that you learned about technology that maybe you liked over this past year. What do we mean when we talk about digital citizenship? Well, we do mean teaching our children what the risks are with technology and how to prevent them, how to prevent those risks. We do talk about how to be safe and how to keep our information secure, but it also means teaching them digital literacy skills. So everything from how do I how do I use, what is a good password? And how do I use privacy settings? Or where do I turn to when I need to find information for a homework assignment that's actually, reputable, credible information? These are all important skills as well. And third is around how we behave towards others and also for our own benefit. And how do we understand what the rules are when we're engaging in online communities? Finally, it is also about teaching our children how to master skills online. Very often when we try and talk to kids about appropriate use of technology, it often feels like a list of things that you should not do. But we have to remember as parents that it's just as important to balance that with the ways in which they should use technology. What are productive, positive uses of technology? How do we encourage them to use it that way? And how do we set good examples of that for them? So when we think about all of this, we break it down into these 4 spaces. We need, as parents, to help our children be set up in a way where being online will be a safe one for them, but also a place where they understand how to be kind and also how to be savvy. And what we mean in each of these cases is, are we setting up the right environment, rules, and example for our children? When we talk about safety, how do we teach them to protect their privacy, their personal information, and even their physical selves? When we talk about being kind, how do we encourage them to do that towards others, but also how do we make sure that they direct that kindness internally as well? And finally, on being savvy, how do we teach them good habits and encourage good uses of the internet? Well, with regard to setting up the environment, some of this may seem like repetitive for you, things you're already doing in your home, and maybe some of you are, maybe some of you aren't. One day we will be out of this pandemic, and we may not need to practice some of these things. I think most of these things, though, are things we will want to make sure are in place if they aren't already, even after the pandemic. So setting up spaces that are good for, physical health are things like, making sure that if you are working online, that there is no distractions, that either you're using headphones or a space that's really, set up for your child to succeed if they're working on homework. And we already do this for ourselves if we're trying to do something for work, let's say. But then our eyes as well, making sure the lighting is such that it's not going to damage their eyes. The 30-30-30 rule is one that I'm a big fan of. Some people call it the 20-20-20 rule. And that is every 30 minutes, look away about 30 feet. It could be out the window, pick a spot and do that for 30 seconds. And you can set a timer on your phone or something to remind you that if you're working at your laptop for a really long time, but you can do that with your children as well. And I've had families tell me over the past year, because kids were on screens so much more, that they've actually gone on Amazon and purchased, they're not very expensive, you don't need a prescription, getting blue light glasses, because we do know that these emissions of blue light, which comes off of screens, can be damaging ultimately to our eyes. So given that we're on them for more periods of time, you might look into that. Again, they're not super expensive. You can spend a lot on them, but I don't necessarily recommend it. It's not a fashion show. This is more about safety. Posture, making sure kids aren't hunched over, whether it's laptops or their phones or the Xbox, and they're seated in a way that's not going to be bad for their posture. And then just getting up and moving, and not being seated so long. Again, these are all pretty obvious. These are things that we should be doing ourselves. But if our children are really young and we're not doing that or role modeling some of this, we might want to reconsider what we are doing as part of our habits. On the network, I think perhaps some of you are already doing this, but if you aren't, here are some basic things to set up your home also for success. The first is, if you have not changed the password on the router that you bought or that you have, please do that, and do that with some frequency. Very often people buy a router and then the password they had on it, they never change. So make sure you do that tomorrow if you haven't done it in a while. And the other thing you can do is consider separating your network. So what we mean by that is your router might allow for a main connection and a guest network. And we actually recommend that for sensitive devices like work or school, things that have information on them that you want to protect more carefully, those should go on the main network. But if it's a child's device that doesn't have any sensitive information on it, maybe a e-reader or a iPod or something like that, consider putting that on the guest network. The reason you want to separate that is if your child's device for some reason gets compromised, gets hacked in some way, it will not end up compromising the more sensitive devices in your home. So consider separating which of the networks that different devices in your home are connecting to. Using a Wi-Fi extender, again, some of you may already be doing this, but this just helps to improve the Wi-Fi connection around your home. So if the router's over here, but you're working over there, having the extender in a place to make the connection better will hopefully set people up in the house for more success and not driving each other crazy, or kids complaining that their internet is laggy, I think is their favorite phrase. Why is my internet so laggy? This is something we continue to practice as a family in our home, but at the beginning of every day, we have very explicit conversations of who is going to be online, in a video conferencing format like this, like we're doing right now. And for those of you with children who are in a remote situation, this can be really challenging throughout the day. But if anytime there's a possibility of staggering everybody's use of the network, it's a good idea. Have those explicit conversations so it doesn't become an argument in the middle of the day. Another thing to make sure that everything is safe in your home is around security. And I would first say that any device in your home that connects to the internet should have security software. Any device, including phones, anything that connects to the internet, make sure it has security software. They don't really have a lot of these options available for things like Ring doorbells or other kinds of internet connected devices beyond PCs and laptops and routers and so on. So that's why actually having doing these good practices with the router is important, because the actual devices connecting through it might not themselves also have the ability for you to install security software. And once you do install the security software, turn on the firewall, this ensures another level of protection for you and the devices, your kids as well. Strong passwords, obviously. And we'll talk a minute about an exercise you could do with your kids to teach them how to practice good skills around passwords. Use multi-factor authentication. This is a feature that is basically like a second password. It exists in many online services and apps. Facebook has it, Instagram has it, TikTok has it. I believe Roblox has it. Not every app has it. Obviously, Google has it for Gmail, but if you have the option to do this, use it, turn it on. And basically, if you have it turned on, after you type in the password to get into that account, you will then, if you gave the service your phone number, let's say, it will then text you a code, and now you've got to enter the code that was sent to you to get in. So it's basically 2 steps. Sometimes it's called 2-step verification. Sometimes it's called multi-factor authentication. It's the same thing. Turn that on wherever it's available. Unfortunately, not every app has this available, but use it when you can. And finally, you may not be doing this a lot now because we're not necessarily doing as much travel as we did before. But if you're ever in a position of using public Wi-Fi, make sure you're never just on it without protection. Using a virtual private network ensures that the information that you have, that you are sending, let's say, to a site that you trust, maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's, some other store online, that in its travels, it is protected during that, from the time it leaves your device to the site it's going to. That virtual private network protects it in transit. When you're thinking about, well, okay, what security software and what virtual private networks should I use? I would recommend going to cnet.com and just searching for the top 10, top 5. Any one of them is great. Trend Micro has security software options, but any one of them will do a good job. Okay, and I think I just answered the question, hopefully. I had a question here, how do you get VPN? So it would be something that you would purchase. So again, if you go to cnet.com and search for the top VPN options and services, that's how you can do it. Okay, thank you for submitting those. And also I encourage you, make sure your questions go into the Q&A, not chat, because I might miss it if it doesn't go into the Q&A. Okay, I have a question here, though, I will take from the chat. If you have a hotspot on an iPad to the iPhone, is that secure? Okay, so if you're just connecting one of your devices to another one of your own devices, assuming those things have security software on them, you're fine. You're just connecting to each other, right? And also the phone is using a hotspot service from your whether it's AT&T or Verizon or whoever you get your connection from. It's actually fine. The issue is, make sure there's a password for your hotspot, because you don't want just anybody finding your hotspot and connecting to it. So make sure, usually they give you this really long password. You can actually change the password to something that you'll remember better, but don't just let anybody jump onto your hotspot, because that is not the most secure thing you could do. On practicing good habits, the first update as often as you can. You'll see that apps today are getting more updates than ever. Part of this is because the amount of time that we are spending online, based on every research metric right now, is through the roof. So these companies are improving their apps and their sites and their services, and their even video games have updates very frequently, partly because they're trying to improve the user experience, but many times those updates are covering up a hole. They're covering up a vulnerability in security that's been discovered. And we also know from our research that cyber criminals are far more active over this past year, because they know exactly the fact that people are home and online. So make sure you're updating everything as frequently as possible, including your children's devices. On making really good passwords, a good exercise that you could teach your kids or encourage your kids to do is, first of all, that the longer the password, the stronger it is. Yes, you should throw in special characters as well, but the longer it is, the stronger it is. And it's not like sites allow you to have passwords that go on and on forever. So what you could do is come up with a sentence and use the first letter of each of the words as your password. Go ahead and throw in an exclamation point or an asterisk if you want, to just make it a little bit harder. But that's a good habit that you could work on with your kids, and have them help come up with a password for, let's say, their own game that they're using, and then make sure at some point later on you work on changing the password again. The more frequently you change it and the longer it is, the stronger it is. Definitely encourage backing up everything. We love our phones. We love taking pictures and videos with them, and it's heartbreaking if they ever get lost. So backing those things up, and obviously important documents too. But Apple and Google, they do offer some space for free, and then if you go past that space, you have to pay. If you can do it, great. But I also recommend, if you can swing it, buying the hard drive backup as well, so that you have both backups in case one gets lost or is compromised in some way. And if you do buy the hard drive storage backup, do not store it in the same place as the laptops and devices. Keep them in separate places if you can, because you want them to be there as backups for each other. So don't put them in the same places. I want to finally talk in terms of setting up the environment about the tools available to you as parents. And these are not tools you necessarily need to buy. These tools help you filter content that's not appropriate for their age, just to limit the purchasing that they can do inside a gaming app, let's say. These tools help you even manage how much time they're spending on the internet in general, but even on a specific device, or sorry, specific app. And finally, you can even monitor what they're doing. And sometimes these tools exist already within the things you own, like your router, like your mobile devices. Your service provider might offer them, but they might charge a little extra for family settings or family services. If you're using security software, they already exist in there too. They're called parental controls. App stores have them. And now, better than ever, that I've seen over the last 3 years, the apps themselves have finally woken up to this need. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. One is iOS screen time. Is anybody out there using iOS screen time now with their kids? It's a really, really great tool. If you're not already, and I'm going to just show you real quick what it does. Great. It sounds like some of you are. So yes, it's very, very useful. But basically the way it works is you go into settings, and you can see that you need to set up each of your children with an Apple under your app family account, your Apple account. And when you do that, you'll see them at the bottom. This is actually my phone, and those are my kids that you see down there, whose names I blurred out because they would kill me otherwise if I showed it to you. And if you select one of those children of yours, you will be able to see not just that screen time, like what were they doing this week? How much time were they spending on games versus social media versus, YouTube, what specific apps? But it lets you also restrict, who they can be contacted by and what kinds of ages of apps they can even download in the first place. I will tell you this, there are many parents who use this to say, when the child says, "May I please use Roblox?" And you say, okay, you can use it for X amount of time. And then you set that setting within screen time. And when the time is up, very often the child then comes over and says, "Can I please just have 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes?" Has anyone ever heard that question before? Maybe once or twice over the period of the pandemic. It's up to you if you decide to extend it or not. I'm a huge fan of any kinds of tools that encourages conversation between parent and child, because in the end of the day, that conversation and the ongoing conversation about their uses of technology is the most important ingredient in all of this. So these tools are helpful, but you having regular conversations with your kids is the most important thing you can do. Anybody's kids love TikTok? I know a lot of you have kids you're in that sweet spot, 11 to 14, I think. Anybody's kids loving TikTok? Maybe any of you big TikTok fans too? All right. Okay, it looks like I think I have a comment here. I'm not sharing screen, is that right? All right, let me share. Here we go. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Thank you for bringing that up. So let me show you a little bit about screen time. I mean, sorry, family pairing on TikTok. Okay. So let's see, and these are great questions too. Thank you I will get to them in a minute. What it requires you to do, and if you're not comfortable with your kids using TikTok yet, this is actually a great way to ease them and you into using it. So what you need to do is go under a setting called Digital Wellbeing, and there you will find the feature called Family Pairing. Once you click on that, you're actually going to need to have TikTok on both your device and the device that they're going to use. And you will at this point designate whether this one is which one is the parent device and which one is the child's device. Once you do that, you as the parent with the account that's on your device will be able to control many things. First is around the kind of content that they're going to be able to see, but you'll also be able to limit how much time they're on it, as well as who they can interact with on the app. TikTok, as you know, is a lot like Facebook, because you don't know, if you look up a video and watch it, you don't necessarily know what's coming next. It's sort of by algorithms feeding you, well, you must be interested in this now that you looked at that. But it doesn't mean that it's appropriate for your kids or you're okay with it. So this setting actually does a pretty good job, especially for younger kids. I've definitely tested it and seen pretty harmless stuff. It's fun. You see animals, you see senior citizens who like to make TikToks. It's pretty harmless stuff. So it's a great feature that I highly recommend you use as a way to ease yourself and your child into TikTok until you're comfortable with them sort of, letting go the reins a little bit and letting them have a little more freedom. But if they're still too young, this is a good way to ease in. The other thing about TikTok too, they just announced this in January. They've decided, you have to be 13 for most of these apps. And yes, by the way, how do they know? Because you have to enter your birth date. But they've decided that between the ages of 13 and 16, that privacy settings would be on by default. That is not true of many other apps. You have to go in and actually turn on those settings. Any kids like Roblox? Anybody's kids? Never heard of it? Roblox. So Roblox actually also has done a great job of giving you some comfort in sort of limiting the kinds of interactions that they have. And this video actually comes from their website, where you first need to, before you can use any settings, you got to set a passcode that only you know, because once you set it, you'll then be able to go in and do all other kinds of safety settings. And it can't be changed without knowing the password. So it works pretty well. You can limit who they can have contact with and whether or not the kinds of like chats. There's a lot of open chats in Roblox that is a little bit troublesome to me. But anyway, that's several of the settings that Roblox enables for parents. So have a look at that too. It's under their settings, and then under security, you set the code, and then privacy is where you do all of these settings. Okay. I love the chat. Keep the chat going too. Now that you've set up all these things for the environment, setting up the rules is really important. And this is really comprised of 5 things. Okay. And one of the things about setting rules is that, maybe some of your kids are a little bit old now, but for the younger ones, maybe they're not. But coming up with rules together with them is a more powerful way of making sure they stick, because you should really stick to the rules you set for them, but they're more apt to comply with the rules that they set, including, by the way, what are the consequences if they break those rules. They should be part of that conversation so they understand what the boundaries are. So if you're not ever sure about an app, let's do this one. I mean, obviously everybody knows this one now, or might know this one now, but I remember several months ago, I didn't know a lot about it. It's an app called Among Us, and it's hugely popular and fun among a lot of kids and even some families who love it. But at the time that my son asked me, I didn't know what it was. So I did a little research on my own. There had been some reviews of it, so it's a good sign if there's a lot of reviews. But also turning to Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media, maybe some of you are already familiar with it. It's a great third-party resource to say, even though the app is this age, according to the App Store, I'm not really sure if it's okay for my kid. Then you go to Common Sense Media to read their reviews of it. It's nice and objective. The other thing is deciding when and for how long they're allowed to use whatever that screen time is. And I'm not going to talk too much about this now because I'm going to go through something called the 24-hour exercise in a minute, which can help you manage screen time with your kids. Deciding where they're allowed to use it, where in the home, like there will be no phones in the bedrooms at night. Best idea is to always charge them in a place outside their bedrooms at night. It is absolutely proven that blue light can also disrupt the quality of the sleep. They should not be using screens at least 1 hour before bedtime to make sure that that sleep is quality. And we also know that sleep deprivation can negatively impact learning. So that is many reasons why the phones, the devices should not be charged in those children's bedrooms at night. Find a common place where everything gets charged. And finally, with whom they're allowed to use whatever the screen time is. So a lot of you have kids who are gaming. Gaming is very, very social now. Sticking to people they know at younger ages and sort of branching out as they get older is a good practice. But if you're just not comfortable and you're not sure, taking a look at those privacy settings and saying, I'd rather they only played with this group, not public, or I don't want them connecting to anybody at all, or they can do it, but only when I'm nearby to supervise, is completely up to you. So those are the rules. You decide what, when, how long, where, and with whom. And coming up with the rules and what happens if you break them together with your kids is a very effective way. Just make sure you stick to the rules and set some rules for yourself, which we'll talk about in a minute. So, screen time. This exercise comes from the Center on Media and Child Health. And I'm a really big fan of it because I think it helps us look at screen time in a bigger context rather than screen time in isolation. And this exercise is something you should do with your kids. Have these conversations every day. So think about the fact that a day only has 24 hours and you can have them write it down on their own or you write it for them depending on their age and ask them, let's first think about what are the things I do in a day that are good for me physically. How much time do I sleep, have meals, or help prepare meals, exercise or play outside? What are all of these things that I do to support my physical health? Okay, so there's some number of hours, right? Next, how much time do I spend in a day doing those things that support me as a learner? How much time am I in school, doing homework, reading? Maybe I'm developing a skill like an instrument or I have some other hobby, but it supports me as a learner. Okay, so how much time now is that? On top of that, how much time in a day do I spend doing the things that support my relationships with others? How much time do I spend with my family? Maybe it's with screens, but it's just sort of with grandparents over, FaceTime or Zoom. Maybe it's with friends and family and neighbors in a safe, socially distant manner, or even past the pandemic, it could just be with friends and neighbors. Now, when you add all of that up, there's probably some time left over in the day, right? And if there is, it is okay to use some of that time for screens. However, once you add up all those hours of things that are really good for you, healthy for you, good for you as a learner, good for your relationships, you may be left with, 6 hours, 7 hours. It doesn't mean you need to use screens for 6 or 7 hours. One thing you could consider is creating a menu of activities, or maybe for your younger ones, you can put some ideas on slips of paper, fold them up, put them in a box, and have them pick out. Now, some of that some of those activities could be screen time, and some of it could be, something else, doing an art activity or reading a book or writing to a grandparent a letter, because nobody writes letters anymore. And my in-laws and my mom love getting letters. But anyway, whatever activities, that's the kind of thing that they could do with the time left over. Why do we like this exercise? Because it really puts into context, if they're doing all of these things that are already good for them and they've done them, then you don't need to feel as badly, especially in a pandemic, if some of that time left over is screens for fun. Some of the homework stuff might actually be a lot of screens too, which it is for a lot of kids these days. So it's just a great way to think about screen time, again, in the context of all the things a child needs to do in a day. Finally, on setting a good example, I just ask you these questions. What rules do you have for yourself? How do you stop, if you work from home, how do you stop work time and begin home time? What do you do with your devices at night? Are they right next to the bed as your alarm? Are you playing Words with Friends as your way of falling asleep? Or do you put it somewhere else in the house? And no, don't facepalm yourself. Don't feel guilty. We're all there. But think about what rules you have for yourself. And yeah, closing the laptop's a great idea. How do you also model the kinds of behaviors that you expect your children to do, to follow? And how do you encourage time together? It could be online time together, like, if you were one of the millions of people who downloaded Disney Plus for the first time this year or in 2020, and you said, we're gonna start from the very beginning of everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or, rewatch some of your old favorites when you were a kid and have your children discover those with you, whatever it is. There could be other things you do, but how are you encouraging that time together? On being safe, there's a couple of things there. Now, many of you actually said that your kids were in that 11 to 14 range. So how many of you have children using social media? And if they are, put it in the chat. Which ones are they using? I would count TikTok in there, by the way, but it's probably IG or Snapchat. Not a whole lot of Facebook among that crowd at all. All right. Yeah, any social media that your kids are using, put them in the chat. Okay, great. So, I think that there is a couple things about privacy that you can share with your children. And I do sessions coming into schools. So I haven't been into schools in a while because of the pandemic, but these conversations with that 11 to 14 range was some of my favorite. So the first obvious thing about privacy is protect it by using privacy settings. Pretty obvious. What you're seeing here is Fortnite, and they don't have it on by default. So my recommendation is, when your kids have a new game or a new app, go in there with them, or even challenge them and say, hey, let's see if you can you figure out where all the privacy settings are and show them to me, or let's see what do they make available. Kind of get them involved as the first thing they think about when they try a new app or a new game. Where is it? Or challenge them to see how long it takes them to find it. And then have them bring it to you and say, here's what the privacy settings This is how they work. Because when they're on their own, we hope that when they're adults, that the first thing they're thinking about is, "Ugh, I better understand what kind of stuff this app is collecting, first of all, and how I can best protect it." So make sure it's on. But here's the other thing about privacy. Privacy settings help protect you from the people you don't know. Right? But there was this point, and when I talk to kids, I ask them the question, is Instagram free? Is TikTok free? Is Snapchat free? And it sparks this really interesting conversation where they say, well, I didn't pay any money for it, but you could tell there's a hesitation there. And invariably, the kids start thinking, but, I am paying with my they are collecting personal information. I guess I am paying. I guess it's not free. And I love having this conversation because what I end up telling them is, it's a trick question. The answer is yes and no. Is it free? And yes, you're right. You're onto something when it comes to personal information. So when we download new apps and we see this wall of legal text and nobody reads it, we just all scroll right past it. And then we go to the bottom and we hit, I agree or I accept, right? But hidden in that language on almost every free app, especially social media apps. Not in these words, but here's an easy way to remember it. You own everything you do, everything you post, but we now have the right to use it whenever, wherever, forever. That's exactly what the legal language says in very simple terms. And so the concept of privacy is, yes, use settings to protect you from those you don't know. But there is no privacy between you and the app and the company whose app you are using. Zero. And I know that many students get pretty livid actually when they hear about this. And I remember a fifth grader asking me, can I sue Instagram? And I said, well, did you say I accept? Yes. Then no, because that's what you've agreed to. And that's what free means on the internet. So this is actually, when we tell children, just nothing's really private on the internet, this is why. We're not just trying to scare them. There's literally no privacy on the internet. So really think about everything you're doing, because those companies are collecting all of this information. And no, they're not necessarily going to use it against you, but the fact is they are holding it. And if someone ever hacked that, then, that's why you should always assume everything you're doing is not private at the end of the day. I think also with regard to cyber criminals, they're not necessarily coming after your kids. Your kids don't have money necessarily, but these cyber criminals are more active today because everybody's home and everybody's online. And they go to the places your kids are. So do your kids use search engines? Well, they can show up there. They create fake search results to try and get you to click something and go to a site that you think is legit and it's not. They exist in pop-ups, something called smishing, which is spam SMS, spam text, basically. They exist in, aggressive advertising that looks too good to be true. So we first should just use security software everywhere. That's largely going to protect your kids if they accidentally download something, click on something, tap on something that is the work of a cyber criminal. But also teach them to trust their instincts, because when I've been in classrooms and I've asked kids, have you ever seen something suspicious that didn't seem right? A million hands go up. They will all tell you, one time I saw this ad, one time I saw this offer for an Xbox if I just gave my mom's email address. So encourage them to trust those instincts of, this looks really suspicious, or and if they feel like they did something wrong, they accidentally clicked on something or like wandered off a website and they're kind of nervous about it, make sure they feel they can come to you without any judgment, to at least let you know, because the last thing you want is that they clicked on something, downloaded some kind of malware, and you didn't know about it, and that could get you into worse trouble when you log into the same computer and go to your banking site. So make sure they feel they can always come to you if they feel like they made a mistake. I'm going to launch a poll question. How many of you have kids with their own cell phone? Yes. Do you have a kid with their own cell phone? Yes, no, not yet, but soon, or not for a few more years. Yes, no, not yet, but soon, not for a few more years. And for those of you saying not yet, but soon, or not for a few more years, we're all going to be in the yes category at some point. But okay, I'm gonna stop the polling here. So it looks like most of you have children with their own phones. So great, because I want to talk a little bit about that. The thing about mobile devices, and the thing that kids love the most, is the camera. Some of you said your kids are already on Instagram and Snapchat, and when social media became less about text and more about images, and now about video, that's why they wanted the camera. But there's something that we need to make sure our children understand. The first is that when they take a selfie, there's more in the image than just their face. If it's not turned off, then the location of where they took the photo is there, the date and time, the kind of camera, the kind of phone. There's actually all this what's called metadata attached to that image. Now, if the photo then is shared on social media and the location services were on, if someone has a copy of the image, they can easily do a search on the location of where the photo was taken. So if that doesn't make you comfortable, even with your own phone and your own pictures that you're posting to Facebook, let's say, go into your location settings and turn it off for the camera. You can leave it on for Google Maps. You probably don't need it on for Words with Friends or Candy Crush. But for some reason, location is on by default for so many apps that we have to question why they really need it. And camera is one of those. So if that's something you haven't done yet on your kids' phones, you might want to consider doing that. The other thing about using the camera, and I need to raise this because we do work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Washington, D.C., and they have seen a rise in images that kids are taking of themselves. Images that you or they would not necessarily want to be shared with the whole world. I think you probably know what I mean by that. And so I highly, highly encourage you to talk to your kids about the fact that just taking a photo like that, even if they never sent it to anyone, the fact that it's existing on the phone is already putting them at some risk. Because very likely, either what if they ever lost the phone, first of all, and secondly, or you back up your images to a cloud service. And if that cloud service was ever compromised, again, taking an image like that puts them at a lot of risk from a technical perspective. But obviously there's harm from a more emotional perspective if it ever did get out or if they ever did send it. So we really want to discourage kids to use cameras in that way, and to use it, have fun with it, do things with it that you wouldn't mind the world seeing. Because there also is a rise in people trying to encourage, if there are people out there who are pretending to be, let's say, someone else their age and saying, that's a great picture, send me another one, and somehow trying to, befriend them, groom them to keep sending more, to the point where they get to a position of what's called extortion, basically saying, if you don't send me another one, I'm going to plaster this one all over the planet. And we need to really have conversations very frequently with our kids about how they're using social media, how they're using the camera in particular, and that they do it in safe and fun ways and not ways that will be harmful to them. Finally, there's a question that was asked of me by a father many years ago. I like to share it with parents every chance that I get, because I thought it was a great one that might not have crossed your mind. And this father was very concerned because his son had a phone, and the phone was obviously under his name because he paid the bill. But his question was, what if his son ever received one of those photos? What if a classmate took one of those and sent it to your child? What should I do as the parent? And my advice to you is, and many law enforcement officers have said the same, if that ever happens, and this is why lines of communication are important, you tell your child to let you know immediately and then delete it. And then you as the parent should take some kind of action, whether it's reporting it to the school administration, if it's somebody that maybe it's a child you don't really know well, so you don't really know the parents all that well, or if you do know the parents of the child who sent it and it's not too awkward for you, tell the parent of that child that it's happened. And this is why. Because essentially, even though these are all underage people involved, the creation of, the possession of, and the distribution of that kind of image is technically a felony. And that's why the father was so panicked, because the bill is under his name. And so by your child telling you and then deleting it immediately, you're not going to be distributing it. And you taking action will mean that you didn't just hold on to it and do nothing about it, right? Because if there's an investigation, if for some reason you don't know if that image also went to other people. So if there's an investigation, they're already going to know that this image went from this device to that device. It's not like you have to walk around with, they already know that it went in that direction. So I hope that's helpful. It's just, I thought one of the questions that I was asked many years ago, I like to share with parents. I'm going to stop here for some questions. How do you set time on the computer and only give them a certain time of play on the screen? I think it depends on what device you're talking about. So if it's on an iPad, let's say, you're able to set time by actual app. So that's why I think screen time has been a really great feature that Apple added recently. There are also, in security software, there is parental controls that allows you to actually, you can block all sites except ones that you can block all sites and then just say, but only allow this site, and this site. It's called creating a walled garden. But yeah, security software has those, all the main security softwares have parental controls that let you do that. Another question here is, we added a new phone line for our child and had to change the number already because it was receiving really inappropriate texts because of the prior owner. How do you prevent it? You know what? That's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think that's really on, the onus is on your cell phone service provider should really be considering who had that phone number before considering giving to a child. I'm not really sure there's any other way to prevent that necessarily, unless you just block text messages completely from the phone and you don't allow it, but that's not realistic. I think one of the reasons kids get a phone is they text each other rather than using social media to message each other. So I hope that's helpful, but it's a great question. I think I'll research that a little bit too. Another question is, TV time considered screen time, and should we limit that 1 hour before bed? Does it disrupt? You know what? It's It's a good question. I think it's a good idea to consider screen time of any kind in the same way, because they also need to just their brains to wind down. I think from a, depending on how close they're to the screen and blue light and all that stuff, not necessarily, but I think it's a good idea to just have them read instead, like paper. Some of the Kindle Whites that have the non-glare screens, I think is okay too for reading if you don't have paper books anymore. But at least it's just something else other than the blue light. Can you talk about YouTube and parameters for an 11-year-old? Yeah, I mean, YouTube created YouTube for Kids app a while back. The problem with YouTube Kids, so basically only kid-friendly content comes through YouTube for Kids app. But 11 is a tricky age because 11-year-olds think they're 13-year-olds, and they don't necessarily want to watch Elmo anymore, even though there's older stuff too. But so I think one thing that you could do with, so there's the other side of YouTube. One is just watching stuff on YouTube, but the other is creating videos for YouTube. Technically, you need to be 13 and above. Now, you can create a YouTube channel that's not public, that could be under your name if the question is about creating videos. But I also will talk a minute about another thing you could do if you have a kid who likes creating videos. I'll talk about that in a minute. So, YouTube's a tough one. It's like TV. They could see anything coming at them when they're just flipping channels. And so you just need to play a more active role. And that's why I like screen time, because you can actually see how much time they're spending on YouTube. Say, hey, I noticed you're on it for this much. What do you watch on it? Can I see some of the things you're watching on there? Now, there is a setting on YouTube, by the way, called safety mode. And you can set it as a parent. You just need a Google account. And you can, if you turn safety mode on, then they cannot search for adult videos. Those will be screened out. Okay, it's not a perfect setting, but it is something if your child is searching for, let's say, certain body parts, and it's mostly doesn't allow them to access adult videos on YouTube. So it's called safety mode in YouTube. So consider turning that on. You just need a Google account, log in, turn on safety mode, and then you can't turn it off unless someone knows your Google login. Do you recommend parental monitoring apps? Like I said, I think you can. I think these free ones, like we're talking about already, I don't know that I recommend the ones you have to pay for, because you're only going to use them so many years of your child's life, unless you're really, really worried. I'm more a proponent of using the tools that are free and available already, and they're getting better every day, and having regular conversations and really good rules about balancing, screen time in a way that's healthy for them. Is there a recommended time per day per age of screen time? There isn't. I mean, in the beginning, the American Academy of Pediatrics said, none for under 2, and then, an hour for this age. And they've really kind of rethought that. And the reason is school and learning. You really can't look at screen time in this sort of monolithic, myopic way. That's why that 24-hour exercise to me is I think, a better way of sort of stepping back and saying, of all the things they're doing in the day, where does fun screen time fit? And is it healthy when I consider all these other things they're doing in that day? I hope that's helpful. I'll take this last question, then we'll keep going. How would I download everything from the cloud and just use a physical hard drive? I pay Apple a lot for family sharing every year, and it takes forever to access it. Ooh, that's a good question. It probably will take some time, because if you have a lot of stuff up there, let me get back to you on that. I think I will take a note on that, because I think that's a good idea. And I do like the hard drive backup. So how do we pull it down from Apple? Apple doesn't want you to, by the way, probably. They probably want you to keep it there, because then you'll keep paying. All right. Let's see. real quick thing on gaming. I think we mentioned already that games are very social, and this it's important that stick to people that you are okay with the kids playing with. I have two other tips on this. If they're playing games like Fortnite, Battle Royale, maybe it's Call of Duty Battle Royale, maybe it's Rocket League, whatever they're playing. For one moment, consider not allowing headphones for the games. Because sometimes the language goes downhill real fast with some of these. They're just ribbing each other, but for a while when my son played Fortnite, I said no headphones because I wanted to know who he was playing with. And the funniest part of it all was I would come by the room and say, who are you playing with? Oh, it's Nathan. Hi, Nathan. Hi, Mrs. Owens. Tell your mom I said hi. Mom, Mrs. Owens says hi. And we could actually all hear each other through the games, but I think it's good for the kids to know that, just keeping an eye once in a while. Then it became the pandemic, and then it was too loud, and then I was okay with the headphones. But once in a while you might, especially if your kids are younger, you might not want to allow the headphones, just to make sure there is bullying that goes on in games. They gang up on each other, they're making fun of each other, and it's all fun if they know each other. But if other kids are joining that they're not super friendly with, and it starts to get a little out of control, you want to maybe check in on that. Finally, for kids who have a hard time separating from the games, consider games that are timed. So that's why I like Rocket League, because Rocket League is just a car driving around trying to hit a soccer ball into the net. That's it. I mean, it's really hard to do. I'm terrible at it, but my son still plays it with his friends. The time runs out. At some point, the game ends. Same with, Madden football, FIFA, NBA 2K 21. It's really hard with games that just have no end. I mean, Minecraft is one of those, can be. So if you have a child that really has a hard time separating, consider games that are timed. On being kind, I think, very quickly on this one, that of course we want kids to treat each other with kindness and respect because it's the right thing to do. But as we spoke about before, nothing's really private online. So it's going to reflect whatever they choose to do, however they choose to behave and treat others, will be a reflection of who they are. And finally, we have, for those of you with kids that using social media, there's a lot of drama that starts in the schools around the time that the kids start using social media for the first time. Here's how it starts. Somebody takes a group photo and someone goes ahead and puts it out on social media. One person does it and everybody else all of a sudden is mad at that person. Why? Because the person who posted it thinks they look great and everybody else hates how they look. And it turns into an unbelievable amount of drama, which could escalate to a lot of bullying in schools. This is like a very common thing. So one thing you could teach your kids is, hey, with at least their close friends, to say, it's not a bad idea. And we should do this with our family too, by the way. I'm going to check in with you before I post it. You okay if I post this? You okay with I post this? And I had to do that with a family member because, some of us in our family are really private, and the kids, we were on the beach with bathing suits and didn't want that stuff being posted. So, it's hard conversation sometimes with family, but if it's ever happened to you, it's tough, right? But you can help avoid drama, and you can do this by having your kids, hey, make a privacy pact with their friends. I'm going to check in with you before I post this. Is this okay? This okay for me to post? The other thing is, some of you are not going to allow your children to have phones till they're 14. And some of you may have already decided at the ages of 11. And that's your choice as families. You have your reasons. You have your values. You have the same decisions about when they date, wear makeup, watch a rated R movie for the first time, walk home by themselves for the first time, whatever it is. These are all individual reasons and values. And we have to teach our children to respect other people's values around technology. There are lots of kids who get shamed and made fun of because they're not allowed to play that really violent video game, but everybody else in their friend group is. We need to teach our kids to respect that different families have different values. The same goes with time that they're allowed to use it. So I was asked again by other parents in the past. My daughter sent her friend a text and she didn't respond right away, and she was so distraught. She thought she was so mad at her. That's why she wasn't answering. When at the end of the day, the child was having dinner with her family, and after that having to do homework and not really allowed to use the phone after that. It had nothing to do with being angry. It's the fact that every family might have different rules. So we've got to teach our children, for their own sake too, to respect these differences. And talk to our kids that, I like saying that kindness and respect is a superpower, because amazing things can happen when you use them. With social media, another thing we have to be careful of is the fact that children now become very anxious. They see other people, they see other people's feeds, and they wonder, how come they're allowed to do that during a pandemic? Or their life looks so much more fun than mine right now? Or why do they have more likes for their photo than I do? And why do they have more people accepting their friend requests than I do? And unfortunately, the way that these systems are built don't help children sort of put it into context. That's us reminding them that they are worth more than the number of likes or followers or comments or whatever online. That is not a measure of who they are. And we need to reinforce this. As parents, we have to acknowledge them for all the other things they're good at. There's no way on earth that social media is the only measure of their value. So how can we do that? When our kids get into trouble, when something upsets them online, we need to be there for them. There's got to be an open door. We know from research that the children who end up getting into trouble online are the ones who have no place to turn, no support network behind them to, have them be resilient in those moments. Those are the kids who end up really getting into the most trouble online. The other thing is to be prepared. You never want to have to know the answer. You never want to have to go back to the answers to these two questions. But I think as parents, let's be prepared to these two questions. Number one, what would you do if someone was really unkind to your child online? What actions would you take? How would you handle it? Think about it now, and hopefully you will never need to use that. The second question is, what would you do if it was your child who was unkind to someone else online? Again, hopefully you'll never need to use it. And by having all these conversations now, you'll never need to use it. But be prepared, because there have been so many situations where, yeah, it's your kid's a good kid, but maybe they just piled on with other kids who were being, unkind to another person. And we need to be prepared in either case of what we would do. And finally, what we can do is show them examples. What does kindness look like? What do you do to be kind to others online? If you find those stories on the internet or on social media, the ones that you go, wow, I have faith in humanity again. Actually, there's good stuff that happens online. Share those stories with your kids so that they know that the internet's not just full of awful stuff, even though it kind of feels like that these days. I'm going to close with being savvy and ask you a question. How many of you have looked yourself up on the internet? How many of you have actually looked your own name up on the internet? And if you have, what did you find? I found someone who owns this really big hotel sort of hospitality business in San Diego, I think. And apparently I also am someone you can write in jail who has my name. It's important to know who who your cyber twins are, it's important for your kids to know as well, because somewhere down the line in their future, they're going to have to represent themselves. And if there's somebody who shares their name with a history, a public history that's not so flattering, they want to be able to explain that away, know it exists and explain that away. The other thing is that it turns out when I've actually asked children, have you ever looked yourself up online? So many hands go up and many stay up because they've actually found things about them that are public. Now, it's not all bad. There are kids who were really great in their Girl Scout, Boy Scout troops, and they got in the local paper, or they won some kind of award, or they were involved in, a great cause, and, that made some public forums. So it's not all bad, but it's not a bad idea. And what you can do, you don't need to go searching all the time for your child's name. What you can do is actually easily set up a Google alert. Go to google.com/alerts, and you can enter any phrase. It could be a name. It could actually be a topic that you love. And this example is just putting Trend Micro, which is my company, but you can choose how often you're alerted. It'll send you an email, once a week, once a day, however often you want. So whenever something public about that phrase happens, you will be alerted. Now, you should know this is for only publicly indexable content. That means content that is posted on social media behind privacy settings won't be publicly indexable. Therefore, it won't be out there and Google won't alert you. So that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing for the most part. That's an easy way to do that. But here's something else that I want to raise. This number, 65%. This comes from the most recent study by the Kaplan Institute. They just published it in January this year. They publish it every January now for the last 6 or 7 years, maybe. And when they first started, they started asking college admissions officers, beyond the application that the student submits, do you look up the students? Do you search for them online? And in the beginning, the answer was 25%. Then the number went up to 30, 35, 40, so on. 2 years ago, they changed the question to, do you feel you have the right? Is it within your rights as an admissions officer to look up these students if you need to? And this number continues to rise. They absolutely believe they do. But here's what's more interesting. 58% of those who ended up looking for a little bit more than the application told them found something that was not so flattering. So that's an argument for doing all of the things we have already talked about, using privacy settings, being careful about what you're posting in the first place, and so on. But this is not a small number either, 42%. 42% found something that sold them on that student, that said, I like what I found. This person belongs here. And that is why this conversation around mastery, around not just telling our kids what not to do, but helping them learn to use the internet in ways that are positive and productive for themselves, for others, and for the world around them, can also really be beneficial. Well, how can you do that? They could be, finding ways to volunteer. If there are things they've won, accolades that could be, public somewhere. Maybe they're an actor, singer, musician, some kind of performer, and you can think about, again, these are for a little bit older, but really starting around the late, early teens to high school should be thinking about this already, of ways to showcase the things that they're great at. So, if your child's a great artist or writer, there are ways to start blogs that are private right now. Don't have to have it public, but they could start collecting a portfolio of the things they're really good at. And when they're ready, could open it up when they're a little bit older, right before applying, let's say, to colleges or going for jobs, making it, not private anymore, opening it to the public. because that 42% is not an insignificant number. So good uses are, learning new skills using Khan Academy, or, TikTok now has a lot of learning videos, as does YouTube. Promoting a cause or raising funds, especially now in this pandemic, there's many causes they can get involved in. I talked about kids who like to make videos or are great artists or writers. There's tons of contests out there that they could enter. This is something, it's a great experience because they may not win, but they learn the skills of working to a deadline, following rules, maybe losing, but learning to kind of be resilient in that situation. And they could win. But just entering and saying I've entered and building portfolios of the things they've entered is a great use of the internet. And any accomplishments too. I mean, Huddle, HUDL, is a popular app that for kids who are athletes in high school, using that because a lot of college recruiters use the snippets from their performances as athletes to see that. So again, for writers, for musicians, for all kinds of things, there are many great resources out there to showcase the good stuff, the stuff we don't necessarily want to hide, the stuff we don't mind that people find out about us or our kids. And so on that note, I've got to do this little plug. Trendmaker actually hosts a contest every year. Every school in America and Canada is eligible. We've been running this since 2010. We ask a question every year, and the grand prize is $10,000. So if the way that works is if a student submits, then the student wins $5,000, and they win $5,000 for their school. Schools can also submit in a different category as a classroom as well. And all they have to do is answer this question: how did the internet help you get through this past year? So go to whatsyourstory.trendmicro.com. They have until April 20th, but I'd love to see some of your schools, your students participating in this. If you go to the site, you'll see all the winners from the past. And believe it or not, the grand prize winner from 2011, before anyone knew who they were, was one of the members of the band 21 Pilots. Just saying, I didn't know who they were when they won. And then shortly thereafter, they won a Grammy or something like that. But take a look at that if you want. So stay active, stay actively involved in your child's online life. Have conversations often, wherever you can, whenever you can. Communicate with your children, with each other as parent communities, and with your schools too, about how technology is being used in the classrooms. I'll give you some ways that you can stay up to date, because the apps, issues, technology is constantly changing. I know I've taken a lot of questions already, and I'll just take these final two. If you see postings from a child's friend that may be questionable or inappropriate, should you let the parents know? Do you think they're aware, or should we keep it to ourselves? This depends on your relationship with that other parent. I think if you feel you know them well enough and how they would respond, I think if you were them, would you want to know? You probably would. If you're not as comfortable with them, I think there is a way for content that's inappropriate to be reported to the platform. You can just report it, whether it's on Instagram or Snap or YouTube or wherever, report it that way. But I think for your own child's sake, doing something rather than sitting by and doing nothing is a better action to take. I hope that helps. And what about YouTube channel, content channels, and safety? I was mentioning that if you turn on YouTube safety mode, YouTube has something called safety mode, that will limit the kinds of, especially adult inappropriate content from your kids, seeing it whenever they go to YouTube. You have to set this, by the way, on every browser though. So if they're looking at YouTube on their own phone, you'd have to do it there, but then you'd also have to do it on the laptop, and you do it on, desktop, and so on. So I hope that helps. So So, when you close out of today's session, you're actually going to be prompted to give some feedback. It's going to take just 2 minutes. And if you leave us your email address in the feedback form, you'll be one of 5 people tonight that will award a copy of Trend Micro Maximum Security. So for those of you who are wondering, how am I going to put security on my mobile devices? It's a free 1-year subscription. I think it's probably close to $100 value. But we'll give 5 people that tonight. You don't have to put your email if you don't want to, though. It's totally up to you if you want to. I do appreciate the feedback. And resources on what we talked about tonight, you can find here from PTO Today at this link, which I'll put in the chat when I close out of here, as well as internetsafety.trendmicro.com. We have lots of tip sheets, but also every other Wednesday we host a webinar with guest speakers on a wide range of topics. Actually, our next session is tomorrow, which you'll see at internetsafety.trendmicro.com/webinars tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. Love to see you there because we've had some really great guests in the past. With that, here is my contact information. Thank you for staying on. We went a little bit over, but I really wanted to make sure I got your questions answered. And feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm pretty active there, or email me. And I would appreciate if you do go in and fill out the surveys, which you will see when you close out of the session tonight. So I'm happy to stay on, take additional questions if you want to go ahead and put them in the Q&A for as long as anybody needs. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me tonight. I'm actually calling in from Boston, where it's a little bit, it's a little late, but it's okay. I love what I do. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and I wish you well to the end of the school year, and hopefully next school year will look different than this one. But hang in there. Thank you for being here, and I think your kids are really lucky that you cared enough to come.